November 1940, Taranto harbour, southern Italy. 5 Italian battleships ride at anchor, protected by barrage balloons, anti-torpedo nets, and batteries of anti-aircraft guns. The most powerful concentration of naval firepower in the Mediterranean, and circling overhead, at wave-top height, close enough to read the names painted on the hulls, is a twin-engine American bomber that the United States Army had rejected as inadequate 18 months earlier. The pilot is a young officer named Adrian Warburton. His commanding officer had tried to have him dismissed from flying duties. His first solo landing in this aircraft type had torn through the perimeter fence. His second attempt ripped a wheel clean off the airframe, and yet here he is, threading between warship masts while his navigator sketches the Italian fleet's positions on a harbour map. That night, 21 swordfish torpedo bombers will use his intelligence to cripple half the Italian battle fleet in a single strike. The aircraft keeping Warburton alive is the Martin Maryland, an American design built for a competition it lost, manufactured for a nation that fell, and inherited by Britain almost by accident. Fewer than 450 were ever built. No complete example survives today, and yet this forgotten bomber played a role in 2 of the war's most pivotal naval intelligence operations, produced the only ace in aviation history to score 5 kills in a bomber type, and gave Britain eyes across the Mediterranean at the moment she needed them most. This is the story of why the Americans were wrong to reject it. In March 1938, the United States Army Air Corps issued Circular Proposal 38-385. They wanted a modern twin-engine attack bomber to replace the obsolete Northrop A-17. The requirements seemed modest: carry 1,200 pounds of bombs, fly 1,200 miles, cruise faster than 200 miles per hour. 5 companies submitted designs. Douglas offered their Model 7B. North American entered the NA-40. Boeing Stearman proposed the X-100. And the Glenn L. Martin Company, working from their factory in Middle River, Maryland, submitted the Model 167. Martin's prototype first flew on the 14th of March 1939, just 3 days before the Army's evaluation deadline, powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney R-1830. Twin Wasp radials producing 1,200 horsepower each for takeoff, it exceeded every original requirement. Top speed reached approximately 310 miles per hour, over 50% faster than the Army had asked for. But by the time Martin delivered their prototype to Wright Field, Ohio, the Army had changed its mind. The new requirements demanded 2,400 pounds of bombs, double the original specification. The Douglas DB-7, which would become the A-20 Havoc, could carry that load. The Martin 167 could not. On the 30th of June 1939, the Army selected Douglas. The Martin prototype was purchased as a single test aircraft designated XA-22, serial number 40706. It would never see production for American service. What the Americans rejected, France desperately wanted. The French Purchasing Commission had been watching the Martin competition with intense interest. Facing German rearmament and acutely aware that their own aircraft industry could not produce modern bombers fast enough, they placed an initial contract for 115 aircraft on the 26th of January 1939. This was before the prototype had even flown. A second order for 100 more followed shortly after. France invested $2.25 million expanding Martin's factory. The first French aircraft, designated Model 167 Ferme, flew in August 1939. These differed from the American prototype, fitted with Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines instead of the twin Wasps, French metric instruments, and 6 7.5mm FN Browning machine guns. Deliveries were briefly halted when war broke out in September 1939. American neutrality laws imposed an arms embargo, but President Roosevelt lifted it in October, and by late November all 115 first-batch aircraft had reached France. When Germany attacked on the 10th of May 1940, 4 French bomber groups were equipped with Marylands. They flew between 363 and 418 combat sorties over the following 6 weeks, suffering a loss rate of just 4%. This was remarkable. The Leo 451, France's most modern indigenous bomber, lost aircraft at 16% on comparable missions. The Maryland's speed was saving lives, but speed could not save France. The Wehrmacht's advance was too fast, too overwhelming. The armistice came on the 22nd of June 1940. When France fell, approximately 100 surviving Martin 167s remained with Vichy forces in North and West Africa. Some participated in the defense of Dakar in September 1940. Others attacked Gibraltar. During the Syria-Lebanon campaign in June and July 1941, Vichy Marylands bombed Commonwealth forces. When Operation Torch landed in November 1942, French Marylands flew against Allied troops one final time. Some examples remained in liaison roles as late as 1949, but 75 aircraft from French contracts had not yet been delivered when the armistice was signed. Britain claimed them. 32 of these aircraft had been completed to French specifications. They arrived at RAF Burtonwood for conversion. French metric instruments were swapped for British imperial gauges. The FN Brownings were replaced with .303 Browning Mark IIs and Vickers K guns. These became the Maryland Mark I. The remaining 43 were completed to British standards at the factory. Britain then ordered 150 more directly, designated the Maryland Mark II. These featured two-speed supercharged engines that pushed maximum speed past 304 miles per hour at 13,000 feet. The technical comparison with Britain's existing light bomber, the Bristol Blenheim Mark IV, reveals why the Maryland transformed RAF capabilities in the Mediterranean. The Maryland cruised at 248 miles per hour. The Blenheim managed 200 at best. That 48 mile per hour advantage, roughly 24% faster, meant the Maryland could outrun most Axis fighters of 1940 and 41. Its service ceiling reached 29,500 feet, at least 2,500 feet higher than the Blenheim. Its rate of climb hit 2,400 feet per minute, 60% faster than its British counterpart. Armament told a similar story. The Maryland carried 4 forward-firing .303 Brownings in the wings. The Blenheim had 1, 4 times the forward firepower. The Maryland could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs internally. The Blenheim managed between 1,000 and 1,320 pounds. There was one significant compromise. The Maryland's fuselage was extraordinarily narrow, approximately 1.2 meters in diameter. This was a deliberate design choice to reduce drag and maximize speed, but it created serious problems for the crew. The 3 men occupied 2 separate compartments, divided by a structural bulkhead. The pilot sat in a raised cockpit with excellent forward visibility. Below and ahead of him, the navigator and bomb aimer worked in a glazed nose position. The radio operator and gunner occupied a rear compartment, completely isolated from the forward crew, manning dorsal and ventral Vickers K gun positions. Crew members could not move between compartments during flight. If the pilot was wounded, no one could reach him. If the rear gunner was hit, he was alone. There was no possibility of in-flight damage control, no crew redundancy, no way to assist an injured colleague until the aircraft landed. On heavily contested missions, this isolation added a grim dimension to every sortie. This was the aircraft's most consistent criticism from operational crews, but for reconnaissance work, where speed and ceiling mattered more than crew comfort, the Maryland was exactly what Britain needed. 3 Marylands arrived at Lucca Airfield, Malta, on the 6th of September 1940. They had flown non-stop from Thorney Island, crossing occupied France at high altitude. These were the first reconnaissance assets capable of monitoring the Italian fleet. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet, had demanded them. He needed eyes on Italian naval movements. Short Sunderland flying boats were too slow and flew too low to survive over defended harbours. The Maryland, fast enough to outrun fighters, and with a ceiling beyond Italian interceptors, could go where Sunderland's could not. The unit was designated 431 Flight, commanded by Australian Flight Lieutenant Titch Whiteley. On paper, they had 12 aircraft. In practice, spare parts shortages meant sometimes only one was airworthy, but one was enough. Reconnaissance flights over Taranto began on the 9th of October 1940. The flight photographed Italian harbours almost daily: Naples, Palermo, Trapani, Augusta, Brindisi, Messina, Tripoli, and most critically, Taranto, where the Italian battle fleet concentrated. By early November, photographs confirmed 5 battleships at anchor: Littorio, Vittorio Veneto, Conte di Cavour, Caio Duilio, Andrea Doria, 14 cruisers, 27 destroyers, the most valuable naval target in the Mediterranean. On the 10th of November, 2 reconnaissance sorties were flown. Titch Whiteley took the first. The second fell to a pilot who had arrived on Malta almost by accident. Adrian Warburton had originally been posted to 608 Squadron flying obsolete Blackburn Bothas. His outspoken criticism of the aircraft led his commanding officer to have him transferred to Malta as an observer, not a pilot. When 2431 flight pilots fell ill with dysentery, Warburton was pressed into service despite his disastrous solo record. His first landing attempt in the Maryland ended with the aircraft tearing through RAF Lucca's perimeter fence. His second attempt ripped a wheel off the airframe. Flight Lieutenant Whiteley asked observer Frank Bastard and wireless operator Paddy Moran if they were willing to fly with him. They thought he was full of guts and said yes. After some high-speed taxiing practice, Warburton was airborne within 3 days. He flew 20 missions in October 1940 alone. On the 10th of November, Warburton's afternoon sortie over Taranto drew intense anti-aircraft fire and a 20-minute pursuit by a Fiat CR-42 fighter, he escaped. The following morning, the 11th of November, came the mission that would change the Mediterranean War. Cloud cover hung low over Taranto. Warburton's cameras could not photograph through it. Standard procedure would have been to return to Malta and report the failure. Warburton made a different decision. He descended to wave-top height. As Navigator Sergeant John Spires later recalled, Warburton told him they were going in at 0 feet, and he was to get a sharp pencil and plenty of paper to plot the ships on the harbour map. Spires and wireless operator Paddy Moren responded, as Spires noted, in a single word. The Maryland made 2 complete circuits of the outer harbour. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Warburton flew so low that Spires could read the names painted on the battleship hulls. The aircraft returned to Lucca with a ship's aerial tangled in its tailwheel. The intelligence was complete. 5 battleships, their exact positions, the locations of barrage balloons and anti-torpedo nets, everything the strike planners needed. That afternoon, the photographs and visual reports were used directly in the attack briefing aboard HMS Illustrious. Swordfish pilot Charles Lamb recalled that a magnificent collection of enlarged prints were pinned to clipboard backings and on display in the wardroom. Intelligence officers had spotted unexpected barrage balloons in the Maryland photographs. Attack approaches were adjusted. Anti-torpedo net positions were factored into torpedo run planning. That night, 21 Swordfish struck in 2 waves. Now, before we see the results of Taranto, if you're enjoying this deep dive into British aviation history, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Now back to the Italian fleet. The Swordfish achieved devastating results. Conte di Cavour was sunk and never returned to service. Littorio took 3 torpedo hits and was out of action for 4 months. Caio Duilio took 1 torpedo hit and required repairs until May 1941. Half the Italian battle fleet crippled in a single night. Official reports recorded the loss of just 2 Swordfish and 4 aircrew. The strategic consequences were immediate. The Italian Navy withdrew its remaining capital ships to Naples and other northern ports. Far from Britain's Mediterranean supply routes, the Taranto strike sharply reduced the Italian Navy's ability and willingness to challenge British convoys, a strategic effect that would persist for the remainder of the Mediterranean campaign. Malta convoys, which had faced the constant threat of Italian battleship interception, now operated under dramatically reduced risk. Admiral Cunningham wrote to Air Commodore Maynard, thanking him for the most valuable reconnaissance work, without which the successful attack would have been impossible. 431 Flight photographed the damage the following morning. The Taranto raid would later influence Japanese planning for Pearl Harbor. Admiral Yamamoto sent a delegation to study the attack. They examined the shallow water torpedo techniques, the use of aerial reconnaissance, the coordination between intelligence gathering and strike execution. All of it rested on intelligence gathered by a handful of Marylands. Warburton's career was only beginning. Flying Marylands from Malta, he scored 5 confirmed air-to-air kills using the aircraft's 4 forward-firing wing guns. This made him one of the very few pilots to reach ace status in a bomber type, and by most accounts the only one to do so flying reconnaissance missions. He also destroyed 3 aircraft on the ground. On the 30th of October 1940, he shot down an Italian Z-506B seaplane during a Taranto reconnaissance. On the 2nd of November, intercepted over Brindisi by a seaplane and 3 biplanes, Warburton was struck by a bullet that penetrated his harness. Sergeant Bastard took the controls when Warburton was briefly knocked unconscious, earning the Distinguished Flying Medal. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Pugh Lloyd, who commanded Malta from 1941 to 42, said that Warburton was the absolute king of photographic reconnaissance, the pearl of the Mediterranean. If he wanted pictures of Naples, Tripoli, or any of the other Axis ports, Warburton would say yes, sir, and go out and get them at no matter what cost. On one mission, Warburton photographed the entire 250-mile coast road from Benghazi to Tripoli in a single sortie, a task thought to require 6 aircraft. One Italian perspective survived through an account shared by a veteran who served at Taranto. He spoke of lone reconnaissance flights over the base by an aircraft that looked like 2 crossed cigarettes, too high and fast for Italian interceptors, which scrambled systematically but never caught it. Warburton flew nearly 400 operational missions. He would eventually disappear over Germany in an F-5 Lightning on the 12th of April 1944. His remains were found near Munich in 2002. By then he had earned the D.O. and Bar, the DFC and 2 bars, and the American DFC. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Tedder called him the most important pilot in the RAF. 6 months after Taranto, the Maryland contributed to another pivotal naval intelligence operation. On the 22nd of May 1941, RAF Coastal Command deemed weather over Norway unsuitable for flight, but Captain Henry St. John Fancourt at RNAS Hatston in the Orkneys needed to confirm whether the German battleship Bismarck was still in Bergen harbour. He assembled a volunteer crew from 771 Naval Air Squadron to fly their sole Martin, Maryland. Lieutenant Noel Goddard, RNVR, took the pilot's seat. Commander Jeffrey Rotherham served as mission commander and observer. Leading airmen John Armstrong and J.D. Milne operated the wireless. Goddard flew on instruments at low level over the North Sea, making landfall at Bergen. The harbour was empty. Bismarck and Prince Eugen had already sailed. Unable to raise coastal command by radio, Rotherham contacted Hatston directly on the towed target frequency. The home fleet was dispatched. This led to the interception at the Battle of the Denmark Strait, and ultimately to Bismarck's sinking on the 27th of May. Rotherham received the DSO. Goddard earned the DSC. Armstrong was awarded the DSM, all gazetted on the 16th of September 1941. A single Maryland, flown by a volunteer crew in weather deemed too dangerous for operations, had confirmed the breakout that triggered one of the war's most famous naval pursuits. Beyond Malta and the Orkneys, Maryland served across the Mediterranean, North Africa, East Africa, and the Indian Ocean. 6 RAF squadrons operated the type. Number 8 Squadron flew them from Aden. Number 39 Squadron used them for strategic reconnaissance during the Battle of Crete, claiming at least 2 Junkers, 52 transports destroyed. Number 2, 03 Squadron operated in the Eastern Mediterranean, contributing to the sinking of U-652 and U-372. Number 223 Squadron provided operational training and Western Desert reconnaissance. Number 5, 44 Squadron flew photo reconnaissance from RAF Benson and Gibraltar, supporting Operation Torch in late 1942. 4 South African Air Force squadrons employed Marylands as light bombers rather than reconnaissance platforms. Numbers 12, 21, and 24 squadrons formed Number 3 SAAF Wing in the Western Desert, attacking Axis troop concentrations, airfields and supply dumps. During Operation Crusader in November 1941, 21 Squadron lost 4 of 9 aircraft on an unescorted raid against El Adem airfield. Number 12 SAAF also participated in Operation Ironclad, the invasion of Madagascar in May 1942, flying 700-mile reconnaissance missions across the Indian Ocean. Vichy French pilots attempting to intercept Inmaran 406 fighters reported that they tried to catch the Martins, but the aircraft outpaced them. The last operational Maryland unit was 60 Survey Squadron SAAF, which retired its aircraft in June 1943. By then, the Maryland had served for less than 3 years in British hands, but those 3 years had been the most critical of the Mediterranean War. The Maryland's operational life lasted barely 3 years. By early 1942, most units had converted to other types. Number 69 Squadron's Marylands were largely destroyed by Luftwaffe bombing of Malta's airfields. Replacements included the Martin Baltimore, the Douglas Boston, the Supermarine Spitfire PR-4 for photo reconnaissance, and eventually the de Havilland Mosquito. The Baltimore was the Maryland's direct successor, designed with a deeper fuselage that finally allowed crew members to move between compartments. Over 1,500 were built. 5 of the 10 Maryland squadrons transitioned directly to Baltimores. The Martin Maryland embodies one of the war's great ironies. An aircraft the United States Army Air Corps deemed inadequate proved operationally decisive in British hands. The Americans wanted a heavier bomber. They chose the Douglas A-20 Havoc, which could carry twice the bomb load. They made a rational decision based on their requirements. But the Maryland's speed, ceiling, and agility, the very qualities that made it a lighter bomber, made it an exceptional reconnaissance platform. At 304 miles per hour and 29,500 feet, the Maryland could go where slower aircraft could not survive. Its 4 forward guns gave aggressive pilots like Warburton the firepower to fight back. Its range allowed missions deep into Axis territory. The contribution was disproportionate to the numbers. Fewer than 450 aircraft were built across all variants for all users. Approximately 225 served with British and Commonwealth forces, yet this small fleet provided the intelligence that sank half the Italian battle fleet at Taranto, confirmed the Bismarck's breakout from Bergen, tracked Axis convoy movements across the central Mediterranean, and supported ground operations from Egypt to Madagascar. During those critical years of 1940 to 42, when Britain stood largely alone in the Mediterranean, the Maryland filled a capability gap that no other aircraft could address. At the highest levels, no complete at the highest levels, no complete Maryland survives in any museum today. Wreckage has been found in the Libyan desert, and recovery proposals have been considered, but no full airframe exists. The aircraft remains genuinely forgotten, overshadowed by Lancasters and Spitfires and Mosquitoes. But for a brief, decisive window, the Martin Maryland was the right aircraft in the right place at the right time, a machine designed for a competition it lost, built for a nation that fell, flown by a pilot nobody wanted, became one of the Mediterranean War's most important reconnaissance assets. An aircraft rejected in the United States had found the role it was uniquely suited for.